People say forgetting is worse than remembering. I used to believe that. I thought being forgotten meant you no longer existed in someone's life. But I learned something far more painful. I wasn't forgotten. I was noticed, measured, and then quietly pushed aside when I no longer fit into anyone's plans. My name is Eleanor Whitman. I am 72 years old. I have lived long enough to know the difference between absence and rejection. Absence can happen by accident. Rejection is a choice. After my husband Thomas died, the house became very quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet that wraps around you like a blanket, but the heavy kind that presses against your chest. The kind that makes you aware of every sound because there are so few of them left. The refrigerator humming. The clock ticking. The wind tapping against the window as if it's asking to come inside. Thomas had been my world for 46 years. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the ordinary, shared life way. Morning coffee. Evening news. Complaining about the neighbors. Arguing over nothing and making up without apology. When he was gone, all of that vanished, and I was left standing in the middle of it, still alive, still breathing, but suddenly unnecessary. My daughter Claire told me I wasn't alone. She said it over the phone, her voice calm, efficient, the way she spoke when she was multitasking. She said she would check in on me. She said she was busy, but she cared. She said many things that sounded like comfort but felt like instructions. At first, she called every few days. Then once a week, then every other week. Always quick calls. Always during her commute. Never when she was sitting still. I learned to recognize the sound of traffic behind her words. Honking horns. A turn signal clicking. Her life moving forward while mine stayed exactly where it was. I didn't complain. I didn't want to be that mother. The one who demands attention, who reminds her child of duty, who clings too tightly. I had raised Claire to be independent. I was proud of her for it. I just didn't realize that independence could turn into indifference so easily. I stayed busy. Or at least I pretended to. I cleaned rooms that were already clean. I reorganized drawers that no one opened. I cooked meals that lasted me 3 days because I no longer had the appetite for more. I told myself this was temporary. Grief takes time. Adjustment takes time, but time has a way of revealing patterns. Months passed. Claire stopped asking how I was sleeping. She stopped asking if I was eating. When she visited, she didn't sit for long. She stood. She checked her phone. She looked around the house with a careful, evaluating gaze, as if she were already imagining changes. I didn't complain. I didn't want to be that mother. The one who demands attention, who reminds her child of duty, who clings too tightly. I had raised Claire to be independent. I was proud of her for it. I just didn't realize that independence could turn into indifference so easily. I stayed busy. Or at least I pretended to. I cleaned rooms that were already clean. I reorganized drawers that no one opened. I cooked meals that lasted me 3 days because I no longer had the appetite for more. I told myself this was temporary. Grief takes time. Adjustment takes time, but time has a way of revealing patterns. Months passed. Claire stopped asking how I was sleeping. She stopped asking if I was eating. When she visited, she didn't sit for long. She stood. She checked her phone. She looked around the house with a careful, evaluating gaze, as if she were already imagining changes. After that, I noticed changes. Subtle ones. She began to bring brochures when she visited. She left them on the table by accident. She talked about friends whose parents were much happier now. She used phrases like simplifying things and making it easier for everyone. Everyone except me. The house, once filled with warmth, began to feel like a waiting room. Like I was supposed to be passing through, not staying. I started to feel like a guest in my own life. One evening, after Claire left, I sat alone at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done. I stared at the empty chair across from me. That chair had held Thomas for decades. Now it held nothing. And somehow, that nothing felt like it was expanding. I realized then that grief wasn't the only thing hollowing me out. I was being quietly erased. The final conversation didn't happen suddenly. It had been building for months, maybe years. But when it came, it was delivered with such calm efficiency that I barely recognized it as cruelty. Claire stood in the living room, arms crossed, her purse already on her shoulder. She didn't sit down. She didn't ask if I wanted tea. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said. "This situation isn't sustainable." I asked her what she meant, though I already knew. "You can't live alone forever. And I can't keep worrying about you. It's affecting my life." Her life. Not mine. She told me she had found a place. A very nice place. She said they had activities and medical staff and gardens. She said it would be a relief. She said it would take pressure off everyone. I didn't say anything at first. I was too busy trying to understand how a daughter could talk about her mother as if she were a project that had gone on too long. She mistook my silence for weakness. "We can do this quickly," she continued. "There's an opening next month." Next month. Like a reservation. I asked her one question. Just one. "Do I have a choice?" She hesitated. Just for a moment. But it was enough. "I think this is the best option," she said. "Not for me. For her." That night, I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands. These hands had held a newborn. Had worked double shifts. Had wiped tears, washed floors, signed school forms, packed lunches, and carried a life that was no longer willing to carry me back. I understood something very clearly then. I wasn't being forgotten. Forgotten people are invisible. I was being discarded. Carefully. Politely. With paperwork. And that realization changed everything. After that conversation, the house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like borrowed space. Every room seemed to whisper that my time there was temporary. I moved more carefully, as if anything I touched might be taken away. Even the air felt thinner, like I was breathing on permission. Claire didn't come for a while after that. She said she was giving me time to process. That's what people say when they've already decided and don't want to deal with emotions. Time to process meant time to accept. Time to stop resisting. I tried to continue my routine. I woke up early, made coffee, watered the plants Thomas loved. But something had shifted. I caught myself wondering how much of this would be mine next month. Or the month after that. I began to look at my life as if it were already ending, not in death, but in relevance. Friends from the neighborhood still waved, but fewer stopped by. I realized Claire had spoken to some of them. Not maliciously, but efficiently. "Mom's not doing great. She's struggling alone. We're looking at options." Options. As if I were an inconvenience that needed rearranging. One afternoon, I overheard two women talking at the grocery store. They didn't know I was behind them. One said, "It's sad, really. Her daughter is doing the right thing." The other nodded and said, "Old people don't know what's best for themselves." I stood there holding a loaf of bread, suddenly aware that society had already agreed with Claire. That age had quietly stripped me of authority over my own life. The next visit came with papers. She placed them neatly on the dining table. Folders. Pamphlets. Forms with my name typed in clean black letters. My name looked strange there, like it belonged to someone else. She explained everything calmly. Costs. Schedules. Rules. Visiting hours. She spoke as if she were booking a cruise, not relocating a human being. I asked her if she had read the documents herself. She said yes. I asked her if she had imagined herself signing away her own home. She smiled politely and said that was different. Different. Always different when it isn't you. I noticed then that she avoided my eyes. That told me more than her words ever could. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room. I didn't turn on the lights. I let the shadows surround me. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. When did my daughter stop seeing me as a person? I searched my memory for signs. Moments I ignored. Times I stayed quiet when something hurt. I realized I had trained her well. I had taught her that my needs came last. That I would adapt. That I wouldn't cause trouble. I had made myself easy to discard. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. When it did, it brought dreams filled with doors closing and voices speaking without sound. I woke up tired, even on days when I hadn't done anything at all. Claire began checking on me more frequently. But it wasn't care. It was supervision. She asked what I ate. Who I spoke to. Whether I had gone out. Her tone was gentle, but her questions felt like inspections. One morning, she asked if I had found my birth certificate. That question struck me like a slap. I asked her why she needed it. She said it was required for the paperwork. I nodded, but inside, something tightened. Important documents had always been mine. Now they were becoming tools. I told her I would look for it. I didn't. Instead, I went to the bedroom closet and pulled out a small metal box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were things she had never asked about. Old bank statements. Insurance papers. The deed to the house. Letters Thomas had written me before he died. I sat on the bed and held that box like it was a living thing. For the first time in months, I felt grounded. There was proof of my life here. Proof that I had existed long before I became a concern. I started paying attention. I noticed that Claire spoke differently when she thought I wasn't listening. On the phone, she referred to me as the situation. She said things like, "Once Mom is settled, everything will be easier." Easier for whom? One afternoon, I asked her if she remembered how Thomas built the porch with his own hands. She nodded absently. I asked her if she remembered learning to ride her bike in the driveway. She smiled faintly. Then I asked her if she remembered promising me she'd never put me in a home. She looked uncomfortable. "Mom, that was a long time ago," she said. So was my devotion, apparently. The days felt heavy. I found myself moving slower, not because I was weak, but because everything felt pointless. Why plant flowers if I wouldn't be there to see them bloom? Why organize drawers if someone else would empty them? This is how people disappear before they are gone. One evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked smaller. Not physically. Spiritually. Like someone who had already begun apologizing for taking up space. That frightened me more than the facility ever could. The next morning, I did something different. I put on my coat and walked to the bank. Not to withdraw money. Just to ask questions. The woman at the desk was young. Polite. She spoke to me slowly at first, the way people do when they assume age equals confusion. But when I asked clear, direct questions, her tone changed. I learned something important that day. Everything was still in my name. Every account. Every document. Every brick of that house. No one could legally move me. No one could sell anything. No one could decide without my signature. I walked home with a strange feeling growing inside me. Not anger. Not joy. Awareness. That night, Claire called again. She asked if I had found the documents. I told her I was still looking. There was a pause. "Mom," she said carefully, "we really need to move forward." I told her I understood. And for the first time I wasn't lying. Because I was moving forward too. Just not in the direction she thought. After that phone call, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the situation had improved, but because clarity had settled in. Fear thrives in confusion. Once I understood where I stood, the fear loosened its grip. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't confront Claire. I didn't argue. I went back to my routine, but this time with intention. Every small action felt deliberate, like placing stones one by one on a path only I could see. I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic. Just observations. Dates. Times. Things Claire said. Things she avoided saying. I wrote them in an old notebook I used to keep recipes in. It felt fitting. I was still feeding myself, just in a different way. Claire began stopping by more often. She smiled more. Her voice softened. People often do that when they sense resistance but can't locate it. She brought food I didn't ask for. She offered to help organize. She suggested donating clothes. I declined politely. Each no surprised her. Each no surprised her. She asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I felt fine. She asked if I was lonely. I said sometimes. She nodded, as if loneliness were a diagnosis, not a human experience. One afternoon, she brought up the facility again. She mentioned a room with a window. She talked about social activities. Bingo nights. Exercise classes. I asked her if she had visited it herself. She said no. That answer settled something in me. People who care make time to see where they're sending you. I began making my own calls. Old friends. Former coworkers. People I hadn't spoken to in years, not to complain. Just to reconnect. I told them I missed them. Most were happy to hear from me. A few were surprised I was still managing on my own. That phrase came up often. Managing. As if living independently were a temporary trick, not a lifetime skill. One friend, Margaret, invited me for tea. I almost declined out of habit. Then I caught myself. Habit had been shrinking me. So I went. We talked for hours. Not about the situation. About books. About her grandchildren. About the way time moves faster and slower at the same time. When I got home, I realized something important. I hadn't felt lonely once that afternoon. Loneliness wasn't my problem. Isolation was being assigned to me. A week later, Claire showed up unannounced. She looked irritated. Controlled, but irritated. She asked if I had been out more. I told her yes. She asked with whom. I smiled and said, friends. She didn't like that answer. She reminded me that she worried about my safety. I reminded her that I had raised a child without a panic button, without GPS tracking, without calling anyone every hour. She laughed nervously. That's when I noticed something else. She was starting to lose certainty. Not power. Certainty. And that made her restless. That evening, I reviewed the papers she had brought weeks earlier. This time, I read every line. Slowly. I circled words I didn't understand. I underlined phrases that felt deliberately vague. There were a lot of those. The next day, I called the number listed at the bottom of one form. I asked simple questions. The man on the phone answered carefully, as if reading from a script. When I asked what would happen if I changed my mind after signing, there was a pause. That pause was answer enough. I didn't tell Claire about that call. Instead, I did something else. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. Not a dramatic one. Just a consultation. The kind people assume you don't need once you reach a certain age. The lawyer listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't talk down to me. When I finished, she said something I will never forget. You are not powerless. You are just being treated like you are. Those words settled deep. I walked home that day feeling taller. Again, not physically. Internally. Like I had reclaimed inches of myself that had been taken without permission. Claire called that evening. She sounded tense. She asked if I had spoken to anyone about the plan. I said I had spoken to people, yes. She asked who. I told her it wasn't necessary to discuss. Silence. That silence felt different from before. It wasn't dismissal. It was recalculation. She reminded me that everything she was doing was for my own good. I asked her calmly how removing my autonomy benefited my health. She didn't answer. Instead, she said we'd talk later. When the call ended, I didn't feel shaken. I felt steady. The fear was being replaced by something stronger. Self-respect. That night, I opened Thomas's old letters again. I read the one where he wrote that I was the strongest person he had ever known, even when I didn't see it myself. I finally believed him. The next morning, I made a decision. Not a loud one. Not a dramatic one. Just a quiet shift. I would no longer explain myself to someone who had already decided my fate without asking me. I would let my actions speak. And I would be patient. Because people who assume you are weak never notice when you stop being convenient. Claire crossed the line on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a small act, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention. She changed the locks. I found out when I returned from the pharmacy. I stood on my own porch, key in hand, turning it again and again while the door refused to open. For a moment, I wondered if I had picked up the wrong keys. Then I saw the lock. Shiny. New. Unfamiliar. My heart didn't race. It sank. Claire opened the door after I rang the bell. She smiled too quickly, as if practicing calm. She said she had meant to tell me. She said it was for safety. She said she worried about break-ins. I asked her why my keys no longer worked. She hesitated, then said she hadn't had time to make copies. I didn't argue on the porch. I walked inside. I noticed my purse had been moved. My mail was stacked neatly on the table, already opened. The house smelled different, like it no longer belonged to me. I asked her how long she planned to stay. She said, just until things are settled. That word again. Settled always meant decided without me. That night, I slept in my bed, but it didn't feel like mine. I woke up every time I heard her footsteps. I felt like a guest in my own life, monitored and managed. In the morning, she made breakfast and placed the plate in front of me like a nurse. She reminded me to take my vitamins. She asked if I had any appointments that day. I told her I was going out. She frowned. She asked where. I told her it wasn't necessary to explain. Her face tightened just enough to notice. She said she didn't think it was a good idea for me to be out alone. She suggested postponing. She said she could come with me. I told her no. That no landed heavily between us. She left the room without another word. An hour later, I noticed my phone was missing. I searched the living room. The kitchen. My bedroom. Nothing. I found it in her bag. I didn't say anything. I just took it back and placed it on the table in front of her. She looked startled. Then defensive. She said she was just trying to help organize things. I asked her if taking my phone was part of organizing. She sighed, as if I were exhausting. That's when I realized this was no longer about care. It was about control, and control doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as concern. That afternoon, she made a call in the other room. She didn't close the door fully. I heard my name. I heard the word resistant. I heard her say, yes, she's still capable, but. Everything dangerous comes after that word. That evening, I asked her to sit down with me. My voice was calm. Steady. That seemed to make her uneasy. I told her I needed my keys. She said she'd get them made later. I told her I needed them now. She told me I was overreacting. I told her she had crossed a boundary. Her tone changed then. Sharper. Colder. She said she was legally allowed to make decisions if I became unfit. She said people would support her. She said no one would believe I was being mistreated. That was the moment something inside me hardened. Not with anger. With resolve. I told her quietly that she should be very careful with what she assumed. She laughed. Not cruelly. Confidently. That laugh told me she believed she had already won. That night, while she slept, I went to the closet and opened the metal box again. I removed copies of every important document. I placed them in my bag. I left the originals where they were. In the morning, I dressed early. I told her I was going for a walk. She tried to stop me. I reminded her she couldn't physically restrain me without consequences. She stepped aside. I walked straight to Margaret's house. I told her everything. Margaret listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said something simple. You need witnesses. That word changed everything. I made calls that day. To the lawyer. To the bank. To a local senior advocacy office I had found through Margaret. I documented everything. Dates. Actions. Words. By the time I returned home, the house felt different again. Not safe. But no longer dominant. Claire asked where I had been. I told her I had been protecting myself. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as her mother. As an obstacle. That night, she locked her bedroom door. I smiled to myself in the dark. People lock doors when they feel threatened. And for the first time since this began, she was the one who felt it. The knock came the next morning. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. Just firm enough to be deliberate. Claire looked up from her phone, confused. I didn't move. I already knew who it would be. When she opened the door, a woman stood there with a clipboard and a calm expression. She introduced herself politely and asked to speak with me. Not with Claire. With me. Claire hesitated. That hesitation said everything. The woman stepped inside and asked if we could sit at the table. She explained she was from a senior advocacy office. She said they had received a concern. Not a complaint. A concern. Claire's face tightened. She asked who had contacted them. The woman said that information was confidential. I watched my daughter realize she was no longer controlling the narrative. The advocate asked me how long Claire had been staying with me. She asked if I felt safe in my home. She asked if anyone had restricted my access to my belongings, my finances, or my communication. Claire interrupted. She said she was just helping. She said I was forgetting things. She said I was confused. The advocate turned to her and said, calmly, I'm speaking with your mother right now. That sentence felt like oxygen. I answered every question clearly. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I told the truth. About the locks. About my phone. About the documents. The woman nodded and took notes. Claire crossed her arms. She said she had power of attorney. I said she did not. Silence filled the room. The advocate asked to see the document. Claire said it was being prepared. The advocate said preparation did not equal authority. That was the first crack. She explained, gently but firmly, that adults are presumed competent unless proven otherwise. She explained that removing access to a home or possessions without consent could be considered coercive. Claire's voice rose. She said she was just trying to do the right thing. The advocate said, intent doesn't erase impact. I watched my daughter struggle to reconcile the version of herself she believed with the reality being described. Before leaving, the advocate gave me a card. She told me to call if anything else happened. She told Claire that she would be following up. Following up. When the door closed, Claire exploded. Not loudly. Sharply. She said I had embarrassed her. She said I was being manipulated by strangers. She said I was destroying our relationship. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said something I had never said to her before. You don't get to save me by erasing me. She stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. That afternoon, she left the house without saying where she was going. She returned hours later with a forced calm and an envelope inside were copies of the new keys. She placed them on the table without meeting my eyes. That night, I slept deeply. The next few days were tense but quiet. Claire moved carefully. She stopped opening my mail. She stopped asking where I was going. She stopped using the word facility. Instead, she watched me. I continued with my plans. I met with the lawyer again. We updated my will. We added clear medical directives. We documented my wishes in language that left no room for interpretation. I learned that clarity is protection. I also learned how quickly people shift when they realize they are being observed. Claire started acting like a daughter again. She cooked meals we used to share. She laughed at old stories. But something was missing. Sincerity. One evening, she asked me if I still trusted her. I told her trust wasn't a switch. It was built through respect. She didn't reply. A letter arrived 2 days later. From the facility she had chosen. It thanked me for my interest and explained next steps. I hadn't contacted them. I hadn't signed anything. That letter wasn't a mistake. It was a test. I folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Claire was sitting across from me when I did. She asked what it was. I looked at her and said, "Your last chance to stop." Her eyes widened just slightly. People don't panic when they're innocent. They panic when they realize they've been caught moving too fast. And Claire was beginning to understand something she had never considered. I was no longer alone. And I was no longer silent. Claire didn't wait long. The very next morning, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands folded neatly, like someone preparing for a meeting. Her voice was soft. Careful. That kind of softness that isn't comfort, but strategy. She told me she had scheduled an evaluation. She said it casually, as if talking about a dental checkup. She said a doctor would come by later that day. She said it was routine. She said it was nothing to worry about. I asked her what kind of evaluation. She said it was to assess my capacity. That word hung in the air between us. Capacity, as if my life could be measured in a checklist. I told her I hadn't agreed to that. She smiled gently and said she was allowed to arrange it. She said professionals would decide what was best. She said it would make everything easier for everyone. Easier again. I finished my tea before responding. I didn't want my hands to shake. I told her the doctor would not be entering my home. Her smile faltered. She reminded me that refusing could make me look uncooperative. She said that might not reflect well in a report. She said sometimes resistance is interpreted as confusion. I looked at my daughter and saw how quickly love can turn into leverage. I told her calmly that any evaluation without my consent would be documented as coercion. I told her my lawyer had advised me of my rights. I told her I would call the advocacy office immediately if anyone arrived uninvited. For the first time, she looked unsure. She stood up abruptly and walked out of the room. I heard her making phone calls. I heard frustration in her voice. I heard my name used like a problem to be solved. I went to my bedroom and locked the door. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. I sat on the bed and waited. No doctor came. Instead, Claire knocked softly on the door an hour later. She asked if we could talk. I told her she could speak from where she was. She apologized. Not fully. Carefully. She said she only wanted what was best. She said she was scared of losing control of the situation. There it was. Control. I told her fear does not justify removing someone's freedom. I told her caring does not give her ownership of my life. I told her love without respect becomes something else. She didn't argue. That silence felt heavier than any fight. That afternoon, I called the advocacy office and reported the attempted evaluation. They thanked me. They said they would add it to the file. File. I had one now. Claire became distant after that, polite but cold. She moved around the house like a guest who overstayed and didn't know how to leave. She stopped making plans. She stopped pretending. One evening, she told me she had taken time off work to stay longer. I told her she didn't need to. She asked if I was asking her to leave. I said yes. The word surprised both of us. She stared at me, waiting for me to soften it. I didn't. I told her I needed my space. I told her she could visit, but not live here. I told her boundaries were not punishment. She packed that night. Not angrily. Quietly. With stiff movements and shallow breaths. She didn't say goodbye when she left. The house felt strange after the door closed. Too quiet. Too open. But it was mine again. That night, I walked through every room and turned on every light. I wanted to see my life clearly. I wanted no shadows. I sat in my living room and realized something important. I hadn't won a battle, I had survived one. And survival changes you. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't afraid of what people might think. Because I had learned the most dangerous lie of all. That being old means being powerless. And I was done believing it. The days after Claire left were strangely peaceful. Not happy. Not light. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when the air hasn't decided what it will become next. I moved through the house quietly, relearning its sounds. The creak of the stairs. The hum of the refrigerator. My own breathing. I expected guilt to arrive immediately. People talk about it as if it's automatic. Especially for mothers. But guilt didn't come right away. What came first was exhaustion. A deep, bone-heavy tiredness that had nothing to do with age. I slept longer than usual. I ate simple meals. I stopped explaining myself, even in my thoughts. Neighbors noticed Claire's absence. A few asked questions. I kept my answers short. I said we were taking space. Most nodded, as if they understood. Some didn't. I could see judgment flicker behind their smiles. I let it pass. Margaret came by one afternoon with soup and quiet company. She didn't ask for details. She didn't offer advice. She just sat with me. That kind of presence felt like a gift. The advocacy office called to check in. They asked if there had been any further issues. There hadn't. They reminded me I could call anytime. That reminder mattered more than they probably realized. I started receiving messages from Claire. Not apologies. Updates. She told me she was tired. She told me work was stressful. She told me she hoped I was doing okay. I noticed she never asked how I felt. That absence spoke loudly. One message mentioned that people were asking questions. Family. Friends. She said she didn't know what to tell them. I stared at my phone for a long time before responding. I wrote back that she should tell the truth. She didn't reply. I began to go out more. Not far. Just enough. The library. The park. Margaret's house. Places where I felt like a person, not a responsibility. Each outing felt like a small reclaiming. I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. She said, "You look well." Not, "You look good for your age." Just well. That stayed with me. At home, I started sorting through things I had avoided for years. Old papers. Old photos. Not to erase the past, but to understand it. I noticed how many decisions I had made quietly, without expecting recognition. I wondered when that had become normal. One evening, Claire showed up unannounced. She stood on the porch and waited. She didn't use her key. That detail mattered. I invited her in. She looked around like she was seeing the house differently, as if it had shifted while she was gone. Maybe it had. She told me people were concerned about her. She said they thought she had been pushed away. She said they didn't understand why I was being so difficult. Difficult. That word again. I asked her if she had told them about the locks. The phone. The evaluation. She said those things were being taken out of context. I said context doesn't change facts. She sat down heavily. She looked tired. Smaller than I remembered. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull to comfort her. I didn't. She asked me what I wanted. That question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in a long time. I told her I wanted respect. I told her I wanted honesty. I told her I wanted to make my own choices, even if she disagreed with them. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. She said she didn't know if she could do that. I appreciated her honesty. When she left, she hugged me. The hug was brief. Careful, like both of us were unsure where the boundaries were now. After the door closed, I sat alone and let myself feel the cost of what I had done. Standing up for yourself doesn't come without loss. I had lost the version of my daughter I thought I knew. I had lost the comfort of blind trust. I had lost the illusion that love always protects. But I had gained something too. My voice. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Not observations this time. Just one sentence. I am allowed to take up space. I closed the notebook and felt something settle inside me. Not peace. But balance. And sometimes, that's enough. Then I waited. The responses came slowly at first. Messages asking if I was okay. Calls filled with awkward pauses. Some apologies. Some silence. One cousin told me she had always wondered why Claire spoke for me. Another said she had assumed I was fine because I never complained. That assumption had cost me more than they knew. Not everyone believed me. A few defended Claire. They said she meant well. They said intentions matter. I didn't argue. Intention had never unlocked my door. Claire called that evening. Her voice was tight. Controlled. She asked why I had shared private family matters. I asked her why she had shared them first. She said I had embarrassed her. I said she had erased me. Silence stretched between us. She asked if I was trying to turn people against her. I said no. I said I was trying to exist honestly. She told me I had crossed a line. I told her lines had been crossed long before I picked up a pen. She hung up. The next few days were uncomfortable. Some people avoided me. Some watched me carefully, as if checking for signs of the story they had believed. I stood my ground quietly. I went about my days. I smiled when I felt like it. I rested when I needed to. I stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. That alone changed how people treated me. One afternoon, someone said, "You seem strong." I didn't correct them. Claire didn't visit for a while after that. When she finally did, she looked different. Not angry. Worn down. As if carrying a story that no longer fit the way she wanted it to. She didn't bring accusations this time. She brought questions. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. She asked if I could forgive her. I told her forgiveness requires accountability. She didn't respond. After she left, I realized something important. Telling the truth hadn't freed me from conflict. But it had freed me from pretending. And that freedom felt steady. Earned. Unmovable. Time changes the shape of things. Not quickly. Not kindly. Just steadily. The weeks after the truth came out didn't bring resolution. They brought distance. A respectful one, but a distance all the same. Claire stopped calling every day. Sometimes days passed without a word. At first, the silence felt heavy. Then it began to feel intentional. Like a boundary we were both learning how to stand inside. I thought about her often. Not with anger. With curiosity. I wondered when fear had become her primary language. I wondered when she had decided that control felt safer than trust. I didn't rush to answer her messages. Not out of punishment. Out of self-preservation. I was learning that access to me was not automatic. People adjusted. Family gatherings became smaller. Invitations were phrased more carefully. Some relationships faded without explanation. I let them go. Peace sometimes costs you an audience. I filled my days with things that asked nothing from me. Reading. Walking. Long conversations that didn't need conclusions. I noticed how my body felt lighter when my mind wasn't bracing for intrusion. One afternoon, Claire asked to meet somewhere neutral. A cafe halfway between our homes. I agreed. She arrived early. I arrived calm. She told me she had been thinking. She said she hadn't realized how far she had gone. She said fear had driven her. Fear of responsibility. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing control. She didn't say she was sorry. Not yet. She asked what I wanted our relationship to look like now. I appreciated the question, even if it came late. I told her I wanted honesty without management. I told her I wanted support without supervision. I told her I wanted her to ask, not assume. She nodded slowly. She said she didn't know if she could promise that all the time. I told her promises weren't required. Effort was. We sat in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was real. When we stood to leave, she asked if she could visit next week. Not stay. Just visit. I said yes. That yes felt different than all the others I had given in my life. It came from choice, not obligation. After that meeting, I updated my documents again. I assigned responsibilities to more than one person. I made sure no single voice could speak over mine again. Preparation isn't distrust, it's respect for your own future. Claire's visits became occasional. Careful. She asked before touching anything. Before making suggestions. Before offering help. That effort mattered. But I stayed alert. Trust doesn't return all at once. It comes back in pieces, if it comes back at all. Some days, I missed the old illusion. The version of motherhood where sacrifice was rewarded and love was enough. Other days, I felt grateful that illusion had shattered. Reality, though harder, was honest. I stopped explaining my decisions to anyone who didn't need to understand them. I stopped shrinking when conversations turned uncomfortable. I stopped confusing peace with silence. One evening, as I locked my door, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval. Not for permission. Not for rescue. I was living. On my terms. Some days, I missed the old illusion. The version of motherhood where sacrifice was rewarded and love was enough. Other days, I felt grateful that illusion had shattered. Reality, though harder, was honest. I stopped explaining my decisions to anyone who didn't need to understand them. I stopped shrinking when conversations turned uncomfortable. I stopped confusing peace with silence. One evening, as I locked my door, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval. Not for permission. Not for rescue. I was living. On my terms. I used to think endings were loud. Arguments. Apologies. Doors slamming shut. I believed closure had to arrive with emotion heavy enough to be noticed. But I was wrong. Real endings are quiet. They arrive on ordinary mornings. With sunlight on the floor. With a cup of tea cooling on the table. With the absence of dread where it once lived. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after everything settled. It became honest. And honesty, I learned, is steadier than comfort. Claire is part of my life now, but not the center of it. She visits. She asks. Sometimes she listens. Sometimes she struggles. I no longer try to manage her growth. That was never my responsibility. I walk more now. Not to prove anything. Just because I can. I take my time in grocery aisles. I sit on park benches without checking the hour. I let conversations end when they're done. I occupy space without apology. People still say things like, "You're strong for your age." I smile, but I don't accept the condition attached to the compliment. Strength isn't a surprise. It's a record of survival. I reread the notebook sometimes. The early pages feel like they were written by someone else. A woman slowly fading. A woman waiting to be decided for. I wish I could tell her she won't disappear. I keep the metal box, but it no longer feels like armor. It's just a reminder. Of a life built carefully. Of choices earned, not borrowed. If there is one truth I carry now, it's this. Being discarded didn't break me, it revealed me. It showed me how easily love turns into control when boundaries are missing. It showed me how silence invites erasure. It showed me that dignity must sometimes be defended, even from the people we raised. I am not angry. I am awake. I am not lonely. I am complete. And if my story ever reaches someone who feels themselves shrinking, I hope they hear this clearly. You are not difficult. You are not a burden. You are not done. You are allowed to take up space. And anyone who cannot honor that does not get to decide what happens next. This is not a story about aging. It is a story about remembering who you are. Before the world tells you who to become. The end.